Good afternoon. I'm Larry Carr with EarthTech. We're engineering and environmental consultants to New Seabury Properties. And the purpose of this afternoon's meeting is to provide an overview and some specific information with respect to construction procedures within New Seabury, most specifically an area known as Section 5, which I assume that sometime in the next few months we'll invent a more romantic name for than Section 5. New Seabury Properties has just entered into what's called a settlement agreement or agreement for judgment with the Cape Cod Commission. The Mashpee Water District were participants in that, and that has led to some specific construction requirements in the area known as Section 5. This afternoon we have Bill Burke from New Seabury Properties, Mark Romanowitz for New Seabury Properties, Steve Brennan also with New Seabury, Dave Rich from the Mashpee Water District is here. Representatives of the Cape Cod Commission were invited and were unable to attend this afternoon, but we will provide them with a tape of this presentation. I don't know if there's any other public officials or anybody else, but I think that covers it. Just as a quick overview, some of you may know New Seabury's been around for a long time, over 40 years. It was begun in the mid-1960s. It has a special permit from 1964. So much of the development you see within the New Seabury area, you may have noticed, doesn't necessarily comply with building setbacks or what you would recognize as minimum lot area requirements in the town of Mashpee today. That's because all the development here in New Seabury is under special permit, so things are done a bit differently. The project was one of the first destination resorts ever in the northeast of the country, and it remains a premier destination today. And many of the roads that you'll be traversing if you're working in here as a contractor are private roads. This is still a private community. Many of these roads and neighborhoods are maintained by homeowners associations. So one of the things you'll be asked to do as someone working within the New Seabury property is to respect that this is a residential community. It's largely a summer residential community, as you might expect. So in the wintertime, things are a little more casual in terms of how you can operate within the property, because there just aren't that many folks here and that much traffic. But in the summertime, it's a pretty busy area, and we'd ask you to recognize that. The Section 5 area, will describe, we are here now at the Country Club area of New Seabury, right on overlooking Nantucket Sound. As you came in the main entrance up here off Great Oak Road and turned left and came by a building here, this is the reception center. It's being converted into a sales center. And you came down along Red Brook Road through here. The area off to your right is the area called Section 5. Had you continued on Great Oak Road out towards South Cape Beach, right after you got by this residential community here, it's called Holiday Estates. It's a timeshare community. It's not part of New Seabury. The area to your left for about a half a mile would have been the other side of the area known as Section 5. And that's the area we're going to talk about in particular today. This easel has what's a conceptual development plan for Section 5. This is not necessarily the final plan, but it's illustrative of the type of development, the character of the development, and the general arrangement of the development within Section 5. These are residential townhouses with attached garages throughout the property, and the existing recreational facilities that are there, which I'll describe in a moment. There is an alternate to this plan which would provide for some additional commercial space in the area where these three buildings are located, and it's not clear at this point. It's driven by market conditions as to whether this area will remain as a residential area exclusively or whether there'd be additional commercial served off of Great Oak Road in this area. There's another small commercial building shown here, illustrated here at about 10,000 square feet. That's what they call convenience commercial, the idea of which is to sort of provide for convenience retail service within the community so that people don't have to drive up to the Mashpee Rotary in the summertime just to get a quart of milk or a loaf of bread and encounter all the summer traffic. Section 5 adjoins, I'll show it on this plan, I guess, easiest way. This is slightly different orientation. Again, the main entrance, the reception center. This is the area outlined in red being Section 5. The area that you see in yellow is an area contributing to the wells that are within Section 5 that I'll describe further in a moment. But I point out that this area immediately south of Section 5 is what they call an area of critical environmental concern. That's a state designation. It's included as an area of critical environmental concern for a number of environmental reasons, but it's a form of cranberry bog. It's a bog area. There's a small pond in there called Witch Pond. So this is an area of some considerable environmental sensitivity. The area to the west of Section 5 on the other side of Great Oak Road is town-owned open space. It's a designated wildlife refuge by the town of Mashpee. There are some out-parcel lots within there, but for the most part, this large tract of land on the west side of the Section 5 area is public open space for conservation purposes. Let's describe what is in Section 5 today. It is partially developed. It's not entirely raw real estate. Again, the reception center visible here. There are two buildings in here. One is a warehouse, the other is a maintenance facility for the new Seabury development. These buildings here, as you come down to this rotary and area in here, which is called the mall, these are not part of the current Section 5 area as we're talking about it, but as landmarks, this is the real estate office and a residential house next to that. There's a road that goes in here, leads back to the existing tennis complex, and beyond that, not shown on this photograph, is a newly constructed golf driving range that was relocated from the area out in front here. So those are the existing facilities within Section 5 today. This road that comes in and leads to the tennis courts and then goes on to the driving range, you may see faintly sort of extends as an old path that extends past the tennis courts here. It also comes down in this area. That's called Hush Road. It's an old road that used to run through this area, and I just point that out because it's a line of demarcation with respect to how Section 5 is to be developed and constructed. There's a out parcel within Section 5 itself that's about 15.5 acres in size. And within that circular out parcel are two public water supply wells. They used to be the wells of the Highwood Water Company, which was a private water company that served New Seabury properties. It was sold to the Mashpee Water District in the late 1980s, early 1990s, and they are now represent over half the public water supply for the residents of the town of Mashpee. The reason the parcel has this circular, overlapping circle shape is because there are two well heads in here. They're fairly close together, but each of the wells is surrounded by a protection zone, which is called a Zone 1, and that's a 400-foot radius zone of protection around each of the wellheads. So that's why the parcel has that shape. Those are two 400-foot radiuses are overlapping circles in there. It shows up more clearly on this exhibit, which I can orient this way for consistency. You can see the wellheads in here. There's an access road. If you come in here by where the existing warehouse and maintenance facilities are, that driveway that continues on is on the Mashpee Water District property. This is not New Seabury properties. This is owned by the Mashpee Water District. And you can see faintly the Zone 1 for the first well, and then you see what's called the Zone 1 for the second well there, and they overlap. New Seabury Properties has dedicated an additional 100 feet around those wells to add further protection to them. So the Zone 1 for practical purposes, is now a 500-foot radius around each of those wells. And that's represented by this dashed line here being an area of further protection around the wellheads. Just as another point, you can see these two parallel green lines here. Those represent the approximate location of an easement. The water main that delivers and circulates the water to the town extends out across here, then comes into the tennis court area and takes a right angle turn along in front of the tennis courts, and then follows that road, that old Hush Road that I mentioned a moment ago. In fact, if you drive on Great Oak Road, you'll see a fire hydrant right at this location. That's sort of the landmark of where that water main comes out. And certainly the development will be laid out to avoid that water main, but just important to know that that's there. That's something that you want to be sure that's dig safe before we start construction. As I mentioned, 4 years of litigation with the Mashpee Water District have been settled, and the result of that was this document here, which is called a settlement agreement. The settlement agreement has something called an agreement for judgment, which is a several-page document, which is essentially a legal document, but underlying that and the real foundation of the settlement are other documents. One is a surface and groundwater pollution prevention plan, and another is a turf management plan. And it's the surface and groundwater pollution prevention plan which has really the real meat of how the construction within Section 5 is to take place. That provides performance standards. There are also, in addition, I should have mentioned, there are a set of environmental performance standards, again, which reference both the surface and groundwater protection plan and the turf management plan. One of the things that the settlement agreement did is it provided for the permanent protection of some of the land within Section 5, and that's depicted here in the two shades of green. The lighter green generally delineates the areas that are now currently used for recreational activity, that being the new driving range and the tennis court area here. You'll notice that one of the tennis courts is not included in that, and that becomes a sort of a flex parcel, if you will, that could be part of the residential development in the future or part of the commercial development, depending upon how that lays out. The other area in the darker green is going to be subject to a conservation restriction, and that's essentially the limit of work line for any activity within Section 5, with some minor exceptions in terms of an easement in one or two locations in order to either establish utilities or maintain utilities that are already in place. So these green areas will be sacrosanct areas during the construction process. And prior to construction, these lines will be flagged in the field and located with GPS, and they will be marked in the field, and either snow fence or other suitable demarcation will be established in the field as a strict limit of work. And then that line will be protected probably with hay bales and other mechanisms as construction moves around through the phasing in Section 5. The other area that's crosshatched in dark is an archaeological resource area. Again, this is going to be subject to a protection restriction. It'll be marked in the field, and it'll have a permanent fence established around it. So the areas that that development can occur in, essentially the white open space areas on this diagram. Notice that there are two small areas here, and those are additional open space areas depending upon how the plan evolves. If this area in here where I showed the 3 residential buildings becomes commercial, then this area here labeled 2A will be used, and this area will become additional protected open space. If, on the other hand, the development remains predominantly residential, then there will be a residential building located here. In this area, 2A will be open space to maintain the total area of open space to which New Seabury and the Cape Cod Commission agreed in the settlement agreement. In total, in the dark area on this, in total is about 21 acres of land. There's about 17.5 acres in the existing recreational uses, and another 5 acres of land in the area that's the Toft area, what they call a Toft, and that's the archaeological area that I mentioned down here. I go back to Hush Road again. You can see it here. It meanders principally as a walking path here and then crosses the road that goes in back to the tennis courts and driving range, and then runs just south of the tennis courts out to Great Oak Road, the hydrant being located in that area. The reason I mention that is because this area here has, in the archaeological investigations, when the resources in this area were identified, this area to the west and south of Hush Road was identified as a potentially sensitive environmental area where there may be additional resources found. In fact, there may be grave sites in that area. So any of you folks that have been working on the Cape for a while know what that's all about. So construction in this area will proceed in a little more structured fashion than perhaps in other parts of the project. There'll be oversight by an archaeologist during the clearing and grubbing phase of development in this area, because an experienced archaeologist can identify just by soil coloration whether there is a grave site. So the work in here will have to proceed in a more surgical fashion in order to allow the archaeologist to make those observations. And there may also be a Native American representative on site when that work occurs in that area. So work in here and here, basically south of the Hush Road area, south of the access road, is going to have to proceed in a pretty sensitive manner. Early on in the project, a sewage treatment plant was constructed that's located up here. It's in one of the higher locations of New Seabury, somewhat ironically. But it's very deliberately there because it's outside what's called the Zone 2, which is the broader area of groundwater contribution to the wells. So the effluent disposal from this treatment plant, which is constructed under some of the golf fairways that are right out to the west of this building, it's able to be discharged in there, and it's not within the Zone 2 to the public water supply wells. And it indirectly helps recharge the irrigation system for the golf course. All of the new development within New Seabury, including the development within Section 5, will be connected to the wastewater treatment system. In Section 5, the piping system will be a double-walled piping system to ensure that there's no leakage at the joints. I mentioned that the settlement agreement and the related documents, one of those is the ground and surface, it's called Surface and Groundwater Pollution Prevention Plan and NPDES Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan. It's a rather long mouthful, but I think some of you, certainly some of you as site contractors have been through the NPDES process before. It requires you as contractors to certify that you are familiar that there is a erosion and sedimentation control plan and a pollution prevention plan, and it provides for periodic reporting. It also provides for inspection by the regulatory authorities who can come on site and inspect the plan. The plan generally consists of a document like this and a set of graphical plans that show how the erosion controls are to be placed. So there's really nothing terribly unique or novel about this plan in terms of the actual implementation in the field. What is the most unique component, I think, of all of this documentation is that the program provides for an environmental monitor. An environmental monitor will be hired at the outset of construction in the Section 5 area, and that environmental monitor will have responsibilities to make inspections or observations and report those both to the owner, the Mashpee Water District, and the Cape Cod Commission. And while that role is somewhat of a policing role, the way it's going to work most effectively is if it's done in a cooperative fashion between the contractors and the environmental monitor. I look at the environmental monitor not so much as a cop who's inspecting things within Section 5, but as a resource to the contractors that are working in Section 5 on means and methods with respect to protecting the wells and anything that needs to be done to protect those wells. So if you as a contractor are concerned that, gee, should I do it this way or should I do it that way, one of the touchstones, in addition to the construction superintendent who's advising you, would be the environmental monitor as a resource in regard to construction methods. This presentation and all of the documents that I've referenced here as they relate to construction will be provided as part of the bid documents for work within Section 5. So this isn't your only shot to hear this stuff. In fact, you'll be required as a bidder on the project to sign an affidavit that you have either attended this presentation, have viewed this presentation, and are familiar with any of the documents that govern construction within Section 5, which include the documents within the settlement agreement, as well as what's called the MEPA documents, which are the Environmental Impact Report documents that were put together under the Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act several years ago. So the MEPA documents include mitigation strategies to protect, for environmental protection as well. So all of those will be part of the bid package so that everybody is aware and everybody can consider what any special procedures that they think are required as part of their bidding process. A couple of years ago, New Seabury Properties took it upon themselves to install a number of groundwater monitoring wells, as you can see, ringing the Zone 1 of the Mashpee Water District's wells. And recently, in the last couple of months, some additional wells have been installed within the Section 5 area. The purpose of this was to establish baseline environmental conditions. Certainly the Water District samples these wells on a regular basis, but it was in the owner's interest to sort of establish a cordon, if you will, around the wellheads and also around parts of the perimeter of the property in the event that any contamination were identified, that the source could be located. So these wells are out there today, and they're going to remain, and they have to be protected during construction. For the most part, they're out of the way of the future construction. As you can see, they're close into the wells here. So for the most part, those wells are within the additional 100-foot setback that's open space in which no construction is going to occur regardless. And these wells, for example, are in the existing driving range that was built recently. These two you can see as you drive by on Red Brook Road. The well that's located here was just off the sidewalk, sort of pedestrian path that's in this area. And there's a couple along the perimeter up near Great Oak Road. So those established baseline conditions, those wells will be clearly marked in the field and have to be protected during construction. One of the things that's going to be going on periodically throughout the construction period is these wells are going to be sampled, and those samples are going to be tested in order to ensure that there's no contamination of the wells. One of the other things that I handed this out is the vehicle refueling requirements. What I did with We've tentatively identified 3 general locations for vehicle refueling for any of the construction vehicles and equipment used during construction of Section 5. And that's here up in the vicinity of the reception center, essentially to support development in this phase of the project, which is shown in the blue color. Another refueling area down here opposite the new Seabury real estate office. This area, there's a road cut in here now and a shell area in here. There were some temporary office trailers in that area, so that area has been previously disturbed and is well suited as a location for vehicle refueling. And the third, up here off the old Hush Road, just west of the tennis courts. Again, there's not particular magic to these locations. This could move somewhat in any direction. More important are the details of the construction of that vehicle refueling area. And when the driving range was built, there was a similar facility constructed for refueling the vehicles at that time. I think this is even a more elaborate facility than that. This provides for a double-lined refueling area. The size of it is roughly 40 by 50 feet. It's a large area. The intent being that in the event that there were a rupture of a full fuel truck arriving at that location, the hose were to be left on, or some of you may remember there was a kind of horrific incident recently up in Gloucester, I think several months ago, where a gentleman that was fueling a boat passed away while he was using the hose, and there was no dead man switch or anything like that on the hose, and it just continued to run fuel into the harbor. So the design of this refueling area and its size is largely to ensure that it has adequate capacity to contain a full spill of a vehicle. So what I handed out is a schematic diagram. It's certainly, as we engineers like to say, not for construction, but it certainly, I think, provides a general intent of how that is to be built, and for the installation of sumps within that, so that it can be pumped out if the need should arise. I think most important thing on just sort of a day-to-day operational basis is going to be the need to cover that facility when it's not in use on the weekends and every evening, because if it fills up with rainwater, then it's going to have to be pumped, and it's going to be more problematic, because that rainwater, even if fueling operation goes absolutely fine, that rainwater would contain some hydrocarbons as a result of just the dripping of the vehicles from the underside of the vehicles that was there. So it would have to be pumped out by somebody like Clean Harbors or someone else. So we want to minimize the need for having to do that. So it's going to be very important that that be covered. There's also, I mentioned, there's a turf management plan. That is more of a long-term process. That's something that after these phases are completed and the units are sold and occupied and the landscaping is completed, the intent is, again, to minimize the application of fertilizers, pesticides, and herbicides within Section 5. In fact, Section 5 itself will be posted with respect to the application of fertilizers and pesticides. I mention it only in that the extent that you may be involved in establishing landscaping after construction, stabilizing an area, it's going to be important that you realize that there are special procedures to be followed in doing that, and that the application of fertilizers, pesticides, and herbicides is going to be strictly controlled. I mentioned the environmental monitor. I just want to reiterate again, rather than have the environmental monitor come around and say, oh, that's not being done right, or I'd like you to change this, the idea is to have this be a self-policing activity, that by providing good construction documents, providing all the contractors with copies of these documents and ensuring that they're familiar with the contents of them, the idea is that it become a team effort. I don't want to set up a him and us sort of situation between the individual that might be fulfilling the role of the environmental monitor at any point in time and the contractors on the job site, because that's just not going to be productive, and it's not going to lead to the kind of environmental protection that we want to have. We can put all the fueling areas out there we want, we can put all the hay bales and filter fabric and what have you. It's really going to come down to a people situation and the attitude of every individual that's working on the site. And certainly I'm sure you've all been on job sites where somebody's finished doing something and they've got third of a can of something left that they can't reuse because it goes bad or they don't want it anymore or whatever, and it gets, tossed out the back of the unit, or, gets flushed down the toilet, or whatever, happens with that kind of stuff. That can't happen here. This is the public water supply, and if you live in Mashpee, you probably don't think that if you live in North Mashpee that you may not be drinking water from South Mashpee because it gets all distributed around in the system. So there's something more important here than just good sort of behavior and good policing. And if anybody has any questions about how any kind of material needs to be handled, again, I want the environmental monitor to be a resource to that. The limit of work areas, again, as I mentioned, these are conservation restrictions. These are going to be deed restrictions. They're going to be recorded. They're going to be marked, clearly delineated in the field. If anybody working on the site sees a breach of that, sees the fence down or sees that there's been an encroachment, that needs to be reported. Again, the idea is not like to make people tattletale on one another, but it is to recognize that these are pretty important issues and that it needs to be corrected. Nobody's going to go blaming people for anything. It just needs to be taken care of. I mentioned the erosion controls. Again, there's nothing particularly unique here. It's mostly hay bales and filter fabric. I think one of the more specific things that you might not be in the habit of doing is more of control of material stockpiles, keeping the quantity of material in individual stockpiles down and making sure that the stockpiles are properly contained, so if there's a rain event, they don't contribute to erosion, and if it's dry in the middle of summer, they're not blowing around. So there are specific restrictions in these documents with respect to how stockpiles are to be managed. As I said, the point I was trying to make is on spill prevention is that it's really an individual responsibility. If you've got any questions, you need to verify. I think there's some obvious situations where the fuel truck or something like that, but I think that people need to recognize that things that you might not think of as a spill, dumping, a couple of gallons of something on the ground that you don't need the rest of, that's a spill, and that can't be done here. So we need to make sure that people have good habits, and if there's a question of something, how it should be handled, again, the environmental monitor is going to be the resource. As we did when the driving range was built, we're going to have materials on site available to contain spills. I tried to establish sort of a buzzword here. I think that, in terms of spill control, the three C's of control, contain, and communicate is the way I'd put it. Those are the three behaviors: control, contain, and communicate. So if you're operating a vehicle that has a hydraulic line and the hydraulic line pops off, the first thing you do isn't pick up your cell phone. The first thing you do, obviously, is you do something to stem the flow from the hydraulic line. So you're minimizing, you're containing that flow. You're controlling that flow and that spill. And it'll obviously will have spilled on the ground, so the next obligation is to do what you can to contain it. And that may be to take some sorbent pads out of a pickup truck and throw them onto the material so that it's being absorbed and not running into the ground. It may be something like grabbing a shovel or a spade and actually scooping out that dirt and throwing it onto a tarp, because the stuff is percolating down into the ground, and the only way you can stem that, obviously, you can't put something under it. So the best thing to do is just grab a shovel and shovel that out and throw it onto a tarp or something, so that you've done what you can as an individual to contain it. And then the next thing to do is to reach out to those who have specific expertise, namely the environmental monitor, construction superintendent, some of the new Seabury property staff. What we will do is we'll provide everyone with a telephone protocol list. We did this again when the driving range was constructed. There'll be, it's like when my wife taught school, it'll be like the snow list, everybody has to call somebody else in order to make sure that the communication is adequate and proper. Dave Rich, who's here from the Mashpee Water District, I still have his cell phone number in my cell phone because when the driving range was built, as it always happens on these sites, there was a hydraulic line that went, and I don't want Dave, picking up the Cape Cod Times and finding out that there was a little spill at New Seabury. Even though that spill got handled absolutely properly, the job is to keep them informed, keep them in the loop, and make sure they're comfortable. So we'll have a protocol list, resources that can be accessed if there's something like that happens. Certainly if there's something that's a major event, then there'll be other folks coming onto the site, somebody like a Clean Harbors or somebody else like that will have to deal with it. And as you know, the threshold, you probably know that the threshold generally is 5 gallons. If it's five gallons or more, it's a major spill. If it's less than 5 gallons, it's a minor spill. Well, everybody'd like to think if they spill something on the ground, oh, that was only 4.99 gallons. I don't need to call anybody. Again, let's not do that. Spill 2 gallons, let somebody know about it, let the environmental monitor know about it, let it be the environmental monitor's judgment as to whether it's something that warrants any kind of special treatment. Again, that's after you've done what you can to control and contain it. And I just sort of wrap up with a couple of comments on sort of general housekeeping. I mentioned that this is essentially a private property. The population here is pretty significant in the summertime. I don't know how many people you have in residence here when everybody's around, but there's 1,200 residential units here within New Seabury, so there's quite a few people around in the summertime. So while you can be a little more casual in the off-season, things like boom boxes and stuff like that, just ask that, just even the volume of the radio in your truck as you might be zooming around with the windows down or whatever would be maintained, kept reasonable. Things like dust control, just driving habits within the property. Don't do what I do. In terms of, at the end of the day, I think the best procedure is to try to cluster the vehicles and keep the vehicles locked. I mean, we want to be concerned about security and people not part of the construction team coming on site after hours or on weekends when folks aren't there. Because one other way an accident can happen here is that nothing that any of us do, but some kid gets onto the site and decides he's going to, those Tonka toys that he had when a kid looked like fun, so he's going to drive one of the front end loaders around or something like that happens. So the vehicles need to be secured. All the equipment and stuff needs to be properly secured. So, and maybe grouping stuff so that it's not scattered around the site, and certainly keeping it as far away from the wells, just as a general housekeeping thing, as is practical. So you're leaving for the weekend, and you got a vehicle that you may be using over in this area to construct. You may be moving it over here or some other area just farther away for the weekend in the event that something were to happen over that period of time. There'll be site security in terms of access into and out of. Certainly the residents and members who are using these facilities, these will be actively used while construction is going on here. That's going to be another thing. You're going to be mixing in traffic with people that are going to come and want to use the tennis courts and the driving range. So that's another reason you have to be particularly respectful and careful about the use of the roads, particularly in that part of the site, because in season in particular, those facilities will be pretty actively used, and people don't want their cars getting dusty and things like material in the roadways and things like that that can cause damage to vehicles and that sort of thing. When you're not here and you're a contractor, as a contractor work here, and you're out on the weekends or in a restaurant or whatever, just ask that you sort of be discreet about your conversations about things. People are particularly interested in this property and this project because it's very high profile for a number of years, and we don't want to get people excited about things that they don't need to be excited about. And that brings me to, again, with respect to site security, if people approach you or you see people on site with cameras and what have you, some may be residents, some may be a reporter, what have you, just ask that if people approach you and ask you questions about what you're doing or any of that kind of thing, you refer them to New Seabury personnel who will be at the reception center, sales center, someone as a point of contact. They're welcome to come on the property if they're escorted and they have authorization. Otherwise, it's a construction site, and safety is a paramount issue, as you all know. Again, that's going to be an issue with the joint use of that area with both the tennis courts and the driving range. I think that's pretty much all I have. I don't know if there's, Dave, do you have any comments or?
Just a couple of comments.
Okay.
Our job in the water district is to protect that water supply. It really isn't anything else. And our position in the past with contractors doing development, doing construction work, is really, we can make your job very easy, or we can make it very difficult. And that determination is yours. If you follow the correct protocol, we're not about to go on site specifically to give you a hard time. We don't operate. But if we get in a position where the protocols and requirements are not being followed, again, our main objective is to protect that water supply. We will do whatever is necessary to protect the supply. The other issue I know Larry brought up, quantities of spills, major spills and minor spills. I think Larry will concur that a gallon of gasoline on the ground will contaminate 1 million gallons of water. I'm not sure there is such a thing as an unnecessary report on a spill. We really need to be kept informed of the spills. I don't think there is such a thing as a minor spill when you're upgrading it of 2.5 million gallons a day water supply. We need to be kept informed, because if we get calls about certain things that happen on the site, we don't know about them, it really makes us all mad. If it's something minor and we show up and it's handled correctly, at least we know that. And if we get calls, we can tell people, yes, it happened. We were there, it was handled correctly. It makes everybody's job easier. The only other thing, if possible at this point, I would like to add is, if possible, if you're parking vehicles over the weekend, I would really like to see them parked down gradient, if possible. Because then if we, Larry can explain up gradient, down gradient, because if something does happen, there's a much less chance of it getting into the public waters.
Where's that drawing? Oh, I had it. Oh, there it is. You know, wells behave like meteors, if you will. They have, you know, have a central point and a long tail that goes out, which is what the groundwater pattern typically looks like around a well point, because the well is drawing the water in. So they very often take on this kind of elliptical shape. And what is shown here in the yellow is generally what's understood to be the direct area of contribution to these wells when they're drawing water in their normal way. What is called the Zone 2, which is the next tier of protection around a well beyond the Zone 1, is far larger than this. It encompasses a couple of square miles as it relates to these particular wells. But this is the direct area of contribution. So the wells are drawing in, as you might expect, from north to south. So down gradient is any area that's sort of down towards the Nantucket Sound from the wells. So I would think that, you know, one candidate for marshaling vehicles on the weekend is in the area of the old where the trailers had been at one time, because that's already disturbed, and that's an area that could be used. You know, this area in general, and I think it's going to really, the ability to do that, Dave, I think is going to relate to how the project phases out and that kind of thing. But I think the points well taken. I think, you know, Dave reiterated the point that I was trying to make earlier. There is this threshold of what's a major spill and minor spill. It's at 5 gallons, but as I said, you know, 2 gallons of something on the ground here You know, one of the things about the Cape, you probably all know better than I, is it has much more pervious types of soils generally than other parts of the state. So a smaller spill here has a greater potential for harm, say, than it might in Rockport or someplace where you know, the soils are much different. And we don't want, you know, the thing that I'm most concerned about in this whole process of having an environmental monitor watching and knowing that the water district is very concerned and other things is that people feel, oops, I spilled. It's like, you know, you feel like you're, you know, when you're a little kid and you make a mistake and you know your mother or your father's going to be mad at you that, gee, I spilled 2 gallons of something, nobody's going to know, nobody saw me, you know. That's not what we want to have happen here. We want to have even the most minor incident, if it's something that occurred, then, you know, touch base the environmental monitor or whatever, then that individual can get in touch with Dave and they can make whatever judgments they need to make about how to treat that. I think for the most part it's going to be non-problem, but we want to encourage people to communicate and not feel that they've, you know, that some kind of, you know, blame or problem. It's more that we all share a common interest in protecting that water supply.
Larry, I would agree with you. If there is a minor spill, which we'll call a gallon or 2, if we show up, the only thing we're going to want to see is that you're taking action.
Right.
We're not going to yell. We're not in this to place blame unless no action is taken.
Right. Anything else? Any other comments? Bill? Mark? Guess anybody else have any questions or? I guess we're all set.
Thank you.
Thanks.